Good evening.
Hey, Susie, how you feeling?
I'm okay. Never had a cold this bad, though.
Yeah, there's something going around.
Hey, folks.
Hi.
Hey, Bob.
Those were some impressive pictures at the dam.
Oh, that was beautiful.
I've been having nightmares that it rains hard and the whole thing washes away.
Well, it looks like they got those walls, those culvert walls set into the footings at this point. So
Yeah, it can't happen. They just are nightmares. It's like, really? Give me a break.
probably not as the nightmares are probably much worse for people who live in that area.
Like that house?
And Becky.
Yes.
Hi, AJ.
Hi. How's everybody doing?
Good. Good.
Good.
Good evening.
Hi, Jim.
Hey, Jim.
April said she couldn't make it. Jim Hemingway. Let's see. Anybody hear from him?
No, there he is.
He's his name.
Okay. Everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. All right. So we'll call the meeting to order and got everybody except for April tonight. Let's start with minutes from October 3rd. Anybody have any comments, suggestions, questions? Review those.
As is.
I like the way Susie spelled saga.
So I guess I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as written.
Yeah, I caught that too. Very cute.
Well, cute.
Sorry, guys, I'm having some audio problems. Bear with me for a sec.
Did somebody second?
I'll second.
Arvanitis, aye.
Groves, aye. Hemingway, aye.
All right. Cashew, aye.
Mosier, aye.
Walton, aye.
Okay, minutes are approved. Sorry, guys, I had my audio on the wrong speaker, so I missed like the first 30 seconds. Hopefully I didn't miss anything important. Okay. So minutes are approved, and I think what we'll tackle next is some follow-up discussion of chapter 70 pool funding, which Susie suggested that there might be an opportunity for some public education about how the Chapter 70 formula works. Help us better advocate for our district. So Susie,
AJ, you're breaking up a little bit.
am I?
Yeah, you're sort of coming in, going in and out.
Okay. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
All right. I think I know what the issue was, but hopefully that'll solve the problem. But, okay. All right. So Susie sent around a couple of documents. I think one was this white paper, and that had a lot of details about the formula. And then there was also a PowerPoint that I think had information about sort of changes related to Chapter 70 for FY24. Folks have a chance to look at those documents?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead, George.
I was gonna say I read each one once, which is really not enough.
Yeah.
You're not ready for the test.
No.
Yeah, it is an enormously complicated process. I have a feeling, I know that like I didn't get as far enough into the white paper where it looks like they actually spelled out the whole formula calculation for a specific like a sample town. I wish I got that far into it because I was feeling like I had a sense of kind of what some of the major factors in how each municipality's kind of local contribution gets calculated, but exactly how it all fits together, it was still kind of quite confusing for me. But Susie, did you want to?
Yeah, I have a couple of suggestions. One, I did get a hold of Rob O'Donnell at DESE about Chapter 70. And he would answer questions or even talk to us, but I said we wanted to get some better understanding. But I find this to be so dense that I don't, unless people got a real sense of something, I feel like we need a subcommittee, a working subcommittee, if we feel like this information is going to have some profitable bearing on what we think and do in terms of advocating for Chapter 70. I'm not sure we do have I don't know. So my feeling is a few people sitting and talking and pointing and waving would be more constructive than all of us trying to take a stab at it, unless somebody in reading it has a big idea, has looked at it and say, oh wait, I think this is the big idea.
All right, let's go around. Jim Walton and then Jim Hemingway.
Yeah, I guess my my first question has to do with what I want to make sure I'm clear on what we think our objective is with this. I hear about advocating for a position, for maybe a Shutesbury position, but going through these documents, I guess my first thought was they've got these formulas pretty well defined as far as how this all works, and I'm just wondering what the process would be to, if that is our mission, is to maybe try to steer this whole process in a direction for Shutesbury, how we would advocate for changing formulas or whatever that are, at least to me, seem like they're fairly clearly defined.
Yeah. I mean, I think a quick answer, Jim, but I see some other hands. I don't want to get to them, but I think I would like to know, I would like to have a sort of better sense than I do right now of kind of which of these factors that kind of go into both the initial calculation of what our, let's talk about the region for a second, about kind of how our regional district's budget, foundation budget is constructed. So like, what are all the different inputs into that? And what are some factors that maybe are potentially kind of depressing our district's foundation budget? And then what are some of the factors that are leading to our local responsibility being sort of higher or lower than it might otherwise be? Like I would like to have a little bit of a sense of, are there certain inputs or factors in the formulas for both of those things? Because it's really like two formulas almost, that are kind of working against us. And if so, those might be places where there's an opportunity for us to do some advocacy. All right, Jim Hemingway, then Bob, and then George.
Yeah, Jim Walton said that it looked like the document and the calculations were fairly well defined. To me, they seem fairly well fixed. I just wonder, the formulas and the math and everything else is so detailed and so worked out. It's sort of like doesn't leave much room for debate if this is what they are going to stick with. So I just don't know where we go from here, because it's sort of like in the can already. And how can we make any changes that might favor us?
All right, Bob.
Yeah, I wanted to support what Jim Walton said about this documents that we got. I had skimmed them. I don't pretend to be a master of them, but I do. And also what Jim Hemingway said, I think that the formula exists, and sometimes the rate that's supported in different categories is going to be increased, which is what's happened recently from my reading there. But I think one thing we have to remember, and I would like to point out, is that one of the biggest problems we have with Chapter 70 money is our declining enrollment over time. And that's not something that, that's something that's structural. That's not something that the state's going to necessarily counteract by increasing our support. We have it through the district and through Western Mass, and maybe through the whole state. There's just been a demographic shift, which has resulted in lower student enrollment. And I think that that's largely responsible for the decline in state support. And, what does that mean for us as a finance committee in Shutesbury? I mean, that's what we have to deal with. We have to deal with that issue. And I'm not saying that we have the answers, but that's something that we don't really talk about here. And it's something that's an important consideration looking forward financially for the town. So just remember that enrollment is one of the major components of the formula. The number of students that you have in your school, not the school choice students, but your own native students, if you will.
George.
Yeah, I'd echo pretty much what everybody said. I think, the purpose is, I think it's important that we understand it. The hold harmless means, the grandfathering means that even if our enrollments go down, at least we get a level amount. But it does go up slightly. So why is that? I agree with you, Bob. I know our counts are down, but it goes up. I just want to understand it. And I think it's important that we understand it. How we can advocate, this little town can advocate to the state and expect anything to change. I just don't see how. We can talk to Saunders' office, and we can talk to we can talk to our representative and ask them to have a conversation with DESE. If we see something that looks like it's flawed and hurts a town like us, sure, maybe but the odds of us actually finding something like that, I just can't imagine digging through this. So for me personally, I just want to understand it. I want to look at the calculation year to year, and I want to see what's changing. To me, the state's failing, because if you look at the foundation and you look how that compares to what is it, the minimum contribution that we should be making, that's our aid. That foundation number is $800,000, just throwing out a number, but close, than what we actually spend on our elementary school.
Yeah.
So how is what they're saying the foundation is and what they're basing the aid on so different from what we're spending? And so for me, it's just about learning and understanding it.
Yeah, George, I think I'd like to know if that discrepancy is kind of how that varies throughout the state. Like, is it the case for most districts that your foundation budget is, which is supposed to represent like an adequate, quote unquote, level of school funding? Is it the case that kind of across the vast majority of districts, I don't know the answer to this, that number is significantly lower than what municipalities are actually spending on it on schooling? And if that's the case, then doesn't that in and of itself suggest the problem that
Yes.
that if the state is defining an adequate spending level, yet most districts are making the decision to spend significantly more, that suggests that maybe there's a problem there. Anyway, Susie and Jim Hemingway.
I had to sort of orient myself, and so I looked at the elementary school budget and thought about where does the money come from, what portion of their revenue is federal, what is state, and what is local, and so looking at some of those revenues come in at different places. They're not just a state aid number the way it comes in for the most part at the region. So then I looked at the region and see that there are costs and funding that don't appear in the Chapter 70 part. And the biggest one is the charter formula. I think the charter formula is screwed up. And it kind of like it was supposed to be a carrot and a stick that we were supposed to want to improve our program so that kids wouldn't go to another, to a charter alternative. But in fact, we have a way above the foundation program in our region, and yet we live in a valley where people can drive their kids to any number of charter schools. And I think the charter formula never really supported public schools. So I think looking at Chapter 70 is part of it, but there's pieces in our revenue and in our expenses that are outside of the Chapter 70 that I think might be contributing to why we're not able to keep up with the level of Chapter 70 supporting us, because there's other factors in this.
Jim Hemingway.
Yes, Chapter 70 money is going up 10% this year. Isn't that a rather large increase? And do we expect to see at least a 10% increase in the allocation to us? Becky? You're on mute.
Becky.
Yeah, I doubt we'll see anything but the per pupil amounts. The 9% increase, they're working on people who are below their foundation levels most strongly.
Mhm.
And that's the point of the foundation level, is they establish what it is. And a lot of what's going on through FY27 is they're trying to make corrections to the foundation budgets. That work was happening for like the last 5 years, and now it's being enacted, and now they're trying to apply the money. So even with 10% increase, which is huge, I don't believe it's going to have an impact on Shutesbury.
Sorry to hear that.
Right.
Isn't the student population overall across the entire state? We're not the only ones that are seeing lower and lower numbers all the time, but isn't this a problem, if you want to call it a problem, that affects almost all school communities?
The number I read tonight, and I'll try to find this report and send out, it's like 137 towns have had growth, and 240 towns have had declines. So you're having a mixture of experiences across the state, but pockets like ours, well, I think we're gonna find we had some extraordinary birth rates during COVID, and we had a lot of children age families move into town during COVID. I think we're gonna start to see increasing numbers in Shutesbury, and I doubt it will be reflected in other towns in our region.
I see they're also increasing the money that's going to be devoted to SPED, and we now have, I guess, a SPED kid that we got to pay for. It's going to be extremely expensive. Do you think we're going to get help, any additional help, perhaps for this one kid who has?
Yeah, we'll get it through the circuit breaker, but the circuit breaker funding is typically a year behind. This is going to be the tough year where we got to make the investments. And then based on those investments, we'll start to see a flow of cash to support them.
Yeah.
George.
Yeah, I don't think and the same is true for chapter 70 because they'll take the enrollment from October 1st, and that sped child will be in that number, and so we'll get a little extra money, but I don't know if the factor is so great that it's even come close to what we're spending. But for me, I was very excited in the spring when I read that the state was looking to add, the governor was looking to add so much money to chapter 70, and I thought, this is great. This is the year where we're going to see a real bump. The increase is 1.5%. And it's probably, as Bob points out, the enrollments, but the state's putting a lot more money into chapter 70, but all the boats aren't rising in this tide. As this tide rises, it's not equal. And that's another reason why I'd really like to understand the formula.
Becky, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we've been in this situation where grandfathering has been in place for over 10 years. And the grandfathering made it so, well, it's a hold harmless situation where towns like Amherst and Shutesbury, especially Amherst, when the formulas change, where they should have declined in the amount of money because of their declining enrollments and whatever else, the state establish a policy of holding harmless and not allowing any town to go below what they were allocated in aid the prior year. So the amount of aid has been artificially held higher than the changes in the formulas can support. And until the factors change and we actually, especially Amherst comes, through the formula to really have more aid, nothing's going to change for the region in terms of getting a chunk of money. And when I talked a long time ago to Steve Kulik about this, I had done a rough estimate back when we did our last study on this, and he agreed that until the state invested at that time about $5 billion, the amount of money for Shutesbury in the Amherst region was likely to remain unchanged.
Great news.
Sorry.
Bob.
Hopefully it won't be that bad.
I just want to maybe following that, I'll just remind the committee that these programs, that is the chapter 70, the foundation budget, the school choice, and the charter program, are all created by the state legislature to help disadvantaged communities. Now, that's what the genesis of these programs is all about, is helping disadvantaged communities that were doing a poor job of educating people in their towns. And that, naturally, it covered the whole state, but the formula is supposed to reflect the neediness of a specific community so they can correct the inequities in their school districts. So places like Lawrence and New Bedford and Lynn and places like that were the targets of these programs. They're progressive programs. Now, we rely on that money, and we're used to having it money, and we're somewhat addicted. Amherst, there's a political backlash when they started to see the numbers being reduced in places like the region. And that was true throughout the state. And these are towns where people have political clout. And so they've been held harmless and not had their money reduced. They haven't really followed the formula. They've increased aid to the poor communities, but they haven't reduced the aid to places like our region. And that's because of the politics. We all understand that. As far as the charters go, similarly, charters were so that kids from poor towns, and whether it be Boston or Lynn or Lawrence or whatever, could have an alternative to their lousy schools. And then, of course, well-off towns like Amherst and Shutesbury, people in those towns were more aware, maybe even perhaps more aware than people in some of the other towns, to use that program to their advantage and to the advantage of their kids. So, I think we should remember that the real target for this money is poor towns, and we don't really qualify as a poor town anymore. We're getting more and more prosperous in this town in our demographic. I think we're going to find that the formula of that we've been fighting for is going to start working against us in all likelihood as that shift occurs, because other towns like Pelham are building affordable housing, and their demographics are going to change, and our demographics are changing in the opposite direction. So I don't think we should expect the Chapter 70 money to increase significantly. It's not, as Becky said, it's not going to increase significantly because our enrollment is not going up, and our demographic is shifting such that the formula will not advantage us in the future. So that's my take on this.
Jim, Walton? Oh, I think
You're
you're
on mute.
I struggle with a couple of the comments. When I saw reading through the document, I saw the 9% increase across the state. I would have expected that we would see something in the order of 9% increase. So I'm struggling with trying to understand what has just changed over the course of 1 year, where we wouldn't see some significant increase. I hear that our demographics maybe are moving in the wrong direction, that we might not have the same head count. But again, Becky, what you said there's 200 and something districts that maybe have a reduction in head count, and then there's 100 and something that have more, which to me almost sounds like the net there could be less. There could be fewer across the board students in school. So I guess I'm struggling. The 9% increase, which seems like a really big increase for 1 year, and we're not going to see anything. The formula
Susie,
that
are
we're
you going to
looking
answer
at
that
with these
question?
documents, the formula we're looking at with these documents is the same formula that's been used for some years.
With changes in the foundation items that that have been, lobbied for heavily and the politics has pushed. So there will be incremental changes in the formulas that might assist us to some extent, but overall, the main battle line is on the poorer communities, and that's where the most money is going.
Okay,
Yeah.
and poor communities is defined by incomes and property values.
Yep.
Those
through
two
the formula.
things.
Yep. Through
And
a lot
you
of
think that
urban
we're
communities.
growing, and we're growing more in those areas than the average town in the state and
They've
city in the
shifted the
state?
formula to provide more benefits to towns with lower amounts. So if all of us stayed relatively the same, those lower income communities are getting more because they shifted the way they calculated, not necessarily the concept, but the dollar amounts for like the amount per low income person in your, because if you look at the tables where they have the calculations, you've got the functional categories on the side, and you've got the I forget what it's called across the top, but things like number of K through 6 and number of preschool students and number of low income students, number of underperforming students. I forget what all the categories are, but I think the underlying formula is when they take the counts, the head counts in those categories, the amount of money they're applying, the rate is higher now than it used to be. So those communities that had the same number of people relative to us in the past are getting more now because they have more of those people. I don't know, I said that wrong, but you see what I'm saying? when they calculate with the rate times number of low-income people, for instance, is probably higher because Holyoke has a lot more of those people than we do. They're getting a much larger increase. I think that's how it works.
But
Yeah.
If you look at slide 3 in the PowerPoint that Susie shared, it spells out that there are higher rates being applied to 5 of the budget areas, and in terms of how the foundation budgets are getting calculated. One of those is low
put
income.
that up on screen if you want.
Yeah, there's like 5 categories, right? Low income, English learners.
I suspect it's can you guys see this PowerPoint now?
Yeah.
These two are sort of kind of working in the way that George just described, right? That like the higher the count of students that meet this definition of being a low income student, and the higher the count of English language learners in your district means that you're getting a higher rate in FY24 as opposed to FY23. I think those are probably I'm guessing two of the big contributors, which would explain why certain communities are seeing something closer to a 10% increase than we are.
Yeah, in that third bullet item, the fourth bullet item, this all started about 3 years ago, about 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. There was a big subcommittee of the legislature or somewhere, DESC, and they were looking at this, and that they created that implementation act, or that act that the last bullet item is referring to. And now we're going into year 3 of it for FY25, where those communities are going to continue to do better.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I think the answer to Jim's question, though, was what Becky said earlier. And I think what Becky described was, we do our calculation. The calculation of our Chapter 70 is done every year. And every year, Shutesbury's ADAM number calculated is always lower than what the previous year was. So we always get the previous years because that's the grandfather, the hold harmless. And no matter how they're throwing more money and how they're changing these things, Shutesbury calculation may rise and it may get better, but it's never more than last year's. So even though they're making all these changes, Shutesbury won't get any more than they got in the previous year, because those new calculations still don't equal the previous year. Does that make sense, Jim? Because I think that's the answer to your question.
Yeah, I think it sort of helps a little bit. But again, I guess overall, you look at this last bullet here, we're in the 3rd year of this implementation, right? So this has been going on for a couple of years, and we're going into the final year of it. The other is someone said, some are getting 9%, we're not. If we're not getting an increase, that means another town, the average other town is getting 18%. It's not, it's a zero-sum game, right? The overall increase for the state is $594 million this year, almost 10%. So if we're going to end up with 0, then again, there's another town out there that's going to make up the difference at 18% or 20%. And I'm just trying to, I'm struggling what has changed that much in 1 year.
It's
that could make this kind of a difference.
It's not just 1 year. It's an accumulation of a trend. It's a continuation of a trend that's been going on for many years. But as George articulated, I believe, we never met the number to get an increase. We've been behind, and it's like George describing the reserve taxes or whatever we have, whatever that term is. We have a deficit that's built. We're never going to meet the new criterion, because we've been moving in a direction of increased property values and increased, average income, household income. And there's other towns that have gone in the opposite direction, and they're getting the increase in the funding from the state. And they also probably may be the towns that have increased in student enrollment. I don't know that, but I know only about one town personally, that is Lawrence, which the education is so crappy that the state has been focused on it for a long time to try to improve it. And I think that's a good thing. I think the state should be doing that. And I think
Yeah.
we, as a comparison to towns like Holyoke and Lawrence, we are actually a wealthy town compared to those towns, and our students are getting a good education compared to those towns.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue that. I would not argue, yeah, like versus a Lawrence or a Holyoke. But the overall state property values have done very well on average across the state, on average. You know, maybe not in Lawrence, maybe not in Holyoke. And incomes have also done quite well across the state. So I don't think we're unique in seeing higher property values or seeing higher incomes. I mean, I understand the point that maybe more people are moving, you know, the COVID factor. I can understand some of this moving in that direction, but I don't see all of it.
All right, let's take Jim Hemingway. I think we should probably wrap up.
Yeah. Obviously, average household income is a very critical factor or number in all of this. Has our average household income here in Shutesbury, has that really gone through a dramatic increase as of late? Do we have any sort of a chart of that? Or, I mean, I know incomes are sort of rising generally, but is there something out of proportion with us here in Shutesbury? Becky, maybe you would know the answer to that, or George.
At the moment, I don't know the answer, Jim, but
Mhm.
I have a couple reference points I can check.
Okay.
Or he
One
can.
place you can look
Oh,
is
sorry,
if
go
you
ahead.
look at our chapter 70 calculation year to year to year, it has the total income of the town. That's all the tax returns filed by all the individuals who file income taxes in our town. And so you can see how much that number rises from year to year by just comparing those different years. So you'd have to go to the
DLS.
DLS,
Yeah.
and do a search on your chapter 70s and get the hysterical calculations for Shutesbury, and then you can get the income off of that. And you can see how much our income is rising as a
Yes.
town. Is it going up 1% a year? Or is it going up 10% because we're turning over houses and the new buyers are all rich? I don't know. I'm just saying.
That's exactly the question I had. Yes, I didn't know if the increases here, and I'm sure there have been, are sort of out of proportion with most towns or not. I'm just curious, because that would certainly explain why, you know, chapter 70 is not working all that well in our favor.
I think Bob made the point earlier. It's enrollments. I think the place
Yeah.
we're going to see an increase is when we see those enrollments increase, those newborns start to enter the school.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's a lag. That's a 3 to
Yeah.
4 year lag.
Yeah, I know, and they're average too, 5-year rolling average, which doesn't make which.
Well, not for chapter 70, right, Becky? Not for chapter
Oh,
70.
that's right. Of course, I'm sorry.
Enrollment's about October 1st.
It's immediate, but if you look at the Shutesbury profile for FY23, our enrollment was 100. And FY22, it was 98. That was the first time, you know, 10 years ago, it was 141. And 30 years ago, it was 211.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, but as we all have seen, there's been a dramatic shift in our community. We have many young people moving in. Chuck Damari's house just sold to a 30-year-old. You know, so it's,
Wow.
Well,
you know,
just-
so big changes in our community.
What happened to that thing? I put it up there. Now it's down again.
All right, Susie, then Jim Walton, and then Bob.
So I encourage Jim Hemingway to go to DLS. You can spend hours looking
Yeah,
at
yeah.
different tables, but it's very informative and you can do that. The question I have is, this has been a productive discussion. Do we want to have more research done, in which case I recommend a subcommittee, or that's what I'm wondering. What do we want to do?
I think that is a good idea, and I think an outcome of that I personally would think would be valuable is if that group could come back to the full committee, and we can have a couple of slides, and we can say, look, this is right here. This is how Shutesbury's chapter 70 calculations were made. And here's a little bit of a historical picture of how these different inputs have changed over time. Like that would be, I think, kind of a useful step, I think. And I'd be willing to spend some time with whoever else wants to be involved. Jim Walton?
Yeah, shouldn't we, for chapter 70 for fiscal year 24, shouldn't we be getting a initial version or maybe a pretty soon or very soon?
Well, the cherry sheet had the same number that we had in our budget.
So the first draft, the first cherry sheet has come out and it's
I
pretty
think the
much
cherry
fine?
sheet's done. Yeah, no, is the
We're
cherry,
talking about last year's cherry sheet. New cherry sheets will start coming out in January from the governor. The
Yeah.
first draft of the chapter 70 details, applying the changes for FY 24 will show up in those after the governor's budget comes out, and then we'll get the detail of.
you're
or
saying the cherry sheet for the current year isn't going to be available till January?
You
I'm
meant
talking about
24.
I'm talking about FY 25, sorry, but all the numbers for the, because we're working towards the future budget for the FY 25 budget, and that's the cherry sheet numbers will be coming out in January for the budget that
Oh,
you're working on this year. You have all the cherry sheet numbers for the closeout of FY 23.
We have them for the estimate for 24 as well.
But I'm sorry, what?
We have the cherry sheet for FY 24 as well.
That got
Yeah.
approved.
The assessor's office is using it right now to calculate the tax rate.
Right, but it's really, that's really the budget we were looking at last year.
Well, I
You
guess
mean
the
the
question
finance
is, what,
committee
Jim, what
was
are you
working.
asking? What,
You mean what the finance
I
committee?
think you're mixing up years, and this always happens with assessors, because you're always working on work that's 6 months off from everybody.
I just don't know what Jim, when you said that, did you mean for the current year?
Well, no, I'm thinking about when we'll be working on the fiscal year.
25.
We'll be working on the budget, next year's budget, and we'll be pulling the cherry sheets that are, there's the governor's the final one, right? Is the governor or
that's
is
the
it the
first
House?
That won't happen
The
until
House,
next
the
August.
House is the final? Yeah, so I guess the question is,
The conference committee is the final
yeah,
in July or August. August this year
Or September.
or September. But it goes governor, then House, and separately the Senate, and then the conference committee.
Which ties it all together, right? The final.
All right, Bob?
Yeah, I just want to say about our discussion that we were having about the household income average that the trends. You know, I think that the rising real estate value says a lot about that fact. I mean, last time I saw the numbers were our household income was over $85,000 a year, which blew my mind comparing it to my own data that I had for myself. And also my understanding of what the town's demographic had been, you know, since I've been here about 40 years. It's changed a lot. And the fact that the real estate values have gone up and the people are coming in here and buying them says a lot about their ability to pay. It just stands to reason that our rates are our household income is going to continue to go up right along with the value of our real estate. So it's unfortunate, but you know, you can blame Jim Hemingway as much as anybody for it because he brought the broadband. He was instrumental. So
Well, thanks, Bob. Thanks.
Mhm.
Well, I can pull the plug up, up at the HUD if you think that'll be of
Just
any
pull
help.
it on Bob's, not mine.
All right, I think we should wrap up now. So just following up on Susie's question. Susie, are you interested in kind of continuing this, or have you exhausted your patience with this formula?
I'll tell you, it's a pretty tough lift for me, but I'm very curious, and I would work on a group to try to figure it out. And I did find information on the DESE website that gave me more information, but I would not be the sharpest knife in the drawer when it comes to looking at this.
Are there any other folks that would be interested in spending some time offline doing research and discussion about this topic?
I don't know if I have the bandwidth.
Yeah. All right. All right, Susie, I'll send you a note and maybe because I think I would be interested in spending a little time.
Okay.
Maybe I could you can pass the torch on some of this work. Okay. So I think this was a good discussion, but for now we'll move on. George, if you are able to, I added to the agenda, I think yesterday, George reached out to me to tell me that he had a mock-up of our budget sort of format that we will potentially be using well, not potentially, we made this decision for annual town meeting. And so did you want to walk us through that?
Sure. Yeah, can I take the screen?
Yeah, I'm gonna just do that now. Okay, yeah, you're coming.
Votes before, it's fine.
Go ahead.
All right, does everybody see budget layout changes?
Yeah, we see your Excel workbook now.
Okay, so what I did was I took a draft that I had of last year's final of the fiscal 24 budget. It's not the final, but the numbers don't matter. It's still the same rows and everything. It's just different numbers before we finally wrapped it up. So what I did was, based on the conversations we had, I combined all expenses for the departments that had salaries in them, so that we basically have the salary lines and we'd have the expense, just an expense line. And then I show all the salary lines. So if you have a department with 2 employees, I didn't roll it up into salaries. I still show the 2 so that people could see the headcounts in each department. Now, when we're done here, we can have a conversation about that. Maybe you all think we should do just salaries and expense regardless. I may have misunderstood that, but I made the decision to keep it separate for now because I think people want to know what the headcounts are in the departments typically. Also, when there were, for the few departments that had a consultant, I think Concom and maybe the assessor, I forget. I kept that as a separate line because to me it's labor, it's like salaries, it's a headcount. I didn't condense departments with no salaries, so you see all the lines in any like general government. And then one particular one I just noted, emergency management, had a couple salaries in it. It had the dog officer and the animal inspector, and it was kind of mixed in, so I didn't break those out. I just left them there. But that's, so we're all familiar with this. This is basically the regular format that we use every year. So you can see, for instance, that the select board has the 2 individuals, and then they have 2 expense lines. So I would have combined these and basically did the same thing for, here's another example, the assessor's office. I would have combined all these. And so I did that on this spreadsheet. And so, for instance, those 2 that I just showed you, here's the select board. The 2 lines they had are now in 1. And then I have the subtotal for the department, which is essentially these 2 rows right here. And you can see I left these 2. The alternate way to do this, of course, is to, give me a second here, and just show it like that, where we might have, and maybe get rid of this line and have it more like this, and this line would be, salaries. So might look like this. So that's the alternative, is bury all the salary lines into the salary. But for now, what I did was I left salaries out again, so people could see the head counts. And in some instances, you can tell that one employee is full-time and one's part-time. So when you scroll through, the other example I think I showed you was the assessors. So again, the assessors had many lines. These are all their expense lines. And all of these get boiled down into the expense line here. So that's essentially what I did. Pretty straightforward, right? Everybody follows along, right?
Yeah, so George, I'm sure this is the case, but just to clarify for everybody, these two budgets are linked, right? So any
Yes.
change you're making to the detailed expense budget is gonna reflect in the condensed version, right? Okay.
That's right. And if we go along with this, we can start with this template, or, I can copy this expenses ATM schedule into the final budget. The connections will probably all automatically work because this is the same. So yeah, that wouldn't be a problem. And that's the way I created it, because Becky's going to get details. She's going to enter the details, and then everything should tie here. And I do put checks and balances in it. So when it's done, it's going to be checking to make sure that the numbers on the two schedules are the same. Because that's going to be one of the tricks, is making sure as the detail schedule is done, that everything migrates here properly, connects here properly. The biggest risk will be when we add and delete rows on the main sheet, because we're adding or deleting expense lines or salary lines. We're just gonna have to be careful. We're gonna have to be diligent. But yes, to your answer,
Yeah,
to your question.
I think that's gonna be essential, right? I mean, that was one of the, I think, concerns that I think we all had when we first proposed this as a possible direction for us to move in, is we wanted to make sure that a bunch of people don't get burdened by, like, namely Becky, with having to manage two different budget documents. And B, it would be a real disaster, I think, for there to be an error where, there's some discrepancy between these two budget forms, and we don't discover that until after, town meeting. And
At town meeting in front of 100 people. Yes.
I know it's
Yeah,
great.
I would definitely I got some checks and balances in it, AJ, and I would definitely try to consider others. And I would try to make it as robust as I could in that regard. I would have to. Your point, the other thing about your point, and I was, going to bring this up later, is remember, budget season gets pretty crazy. Numbers change pretty fast and pretty frequently. And when Becky's dealing with the pressures of a deadline for printing the budget, that's when mistakes happen. It's not a knock on Becky. That's just the way of the world. Any of us who have been in stressful jobs know what happens. So yeah, that's a risk for sure. And so I would try to make it, again, as robust as I could. So let me show you the results of what I did. So you saw what I was talking about. One way we could condense it more is if we did combine the salary lines for each department into just one line. So here's the departments that actually were affected by this change, and there's 11 of them. And so at most, we might save, if we combine salaries into a single line, it would only be for these 11 departments. Some of these, there's only 2. Some of these only have 1 salary already. And so really the most lines it's going to save us is about 11 lines, I would say. So what this shows you is the 11 departments that I did the consolidations for, and you can see which lines were consolidated in each of those. So like I showed you in the assessors earlier, that's probably one with the most lines. But here's the treasurer has a bunch. Town collector has 2. And you can see them all. Town buildings, huh? Give me 1 second here. Town buildings. Let's look at that one. Does town buildings have a salary line in it? Oh yeah, it does. Custodial wages. Okay. Yeah, okay. So, I know you're all thinking it, some of these lines, do we really want to bury them? Is a question we have to have. But anyways, so everybody saw what we use now, what it could look like. Here's the departments that are affected, and here's their lines. So at this point, I would tell you that 11 departments are affected. 42 lines are all I picked up by what I did. So that's 282 lines versus what used to be 324. We're still going to use the same amount of paper because it's just going to take the last page and probably cut it in half or by 2/3. We'll save ink. And then, some departments, like I said earlier, will have large expenses that maybe we don't want to bury. And some departments may have expenses, but only one large emergency maintenance. So if we go to emergency maintenance, emergency management, these are all small, but there's one line we definitely probably never want to bury. And this is a bad example. This is the department I was telling you about where there's 2 salary lines and I didn't combine them. The way they're broken out, building inspector, there's actually 3. And I could, if you all wanted me to do that, I could do that, shift this around. That would be a little tricky in the connections, but we could manage it. And so that's pretty much it. I mean, that's what and if anybody sees any other variations of this that you want, I can do that. And we can go through this exercise again, like the salary lines I talked about. And before I talked about pros and cons, did anybody have any questions? Did anybody want to go back and see anything in particular? Or do you all feel like you've got it figured out?
Well, I have a comment about the salary thing, but let me just first your committee member. So Susie? Oh, you're muted, Susie.
You didn't want to hear me cough. I guess I'm don't like the expression bury them. So I want to go back to remembering why we're doing this. We're still having, as a committee, total access to every information in the previous format. What we're wondering about is how to present it to town meeting, and would town meeting accept information in bigger chunks? Would they be satisfied with it? And we also agreed that the town meeting would have access to the fully detailed one. So I guess I want to keep considering how the possibility of continuing to combine some of these lines for the purpose of making the information for town meeting more condensed, but having access to the whole thing.
And that's one of the objectives, Susie, but I think there's also a second objective we discussed, right? Which is to provide some
Flexibility
for department heads. And it's not I could easily see scenarios where because of hiring issues in a particular given year, a department might want to move some of its budget from one salary line to another. If there are delays in hiring for certain. So I think my instinct on this was to do more consolidation on these salary lines, George. And I think I had the same instinct as Susie, which is to not think of it as burying, right? Because we're going to have the detailed budget that everybody's going to have access, including the town is going to continue to have access to it. We know there will be people, individuals and groups that are interested in the details, but and so they'll continue to have access to that detailed budget. But for the 2 goals that we have for this condensed budget, I think both of those goals of presenting a simplified, kind of more easily understood budget and giving department heads some more flexibility to move funds from one budget line to another, as long as it's not creating an increase overall, an overall increase for both of those goals. I think benefit from more consolidation as opposed to less. Bob, and then Becky.
I won't go on too long, but I favor detail. I said that in our meeting when we discussed this, when the committee voted to adopt or investigate this system here. But I think George is right about the head count, and I think that people, we all know that we're deeply engaged with this process and with these numbers and with town budgets, but most town meeting members are not, and they need to have enough detail to understand how their money is being spent. I mean, they don't need they're not gonna get, they're only gonna absorb so much. We all know this. It's just, they're there, they're seeing the documents probably for the first time. And they need to know enough detail to know how the money is being spent. And I think that having a headcount for a number of employees is one fact. I agree with George here that is necessary for their understanding. And I don't like the idea of flexibility, as a goal, because what that means is that there'll never be a decrease that follows a decreased need, because it'll just be shifted around. And then we'll never get the benefit of some efficiency that we might have achieved through some development in the town, whether it be new equipment or global warming or what have you. So I like to just for, as a builder who was a contractor, I always provided my customer with the maximum amount of detail that they could, that I could, because I thought that was the best way to communicate what the project was, what it wasn't, what they were paying for. And I feel the same way about the budget.
All right, Becky and then Jim Walton.
My question, Susie said that we would make sure to have town meeting folks would have access to the full budget. How does that happen at town meeting?
We said we would have some printed copies and it would be online. That was said in the meeting that we.
So we'd have not only the ATM budget available, but the full budget available?
Yeah, I think we can have a conversation about whether we have physical hard copies or not. My instinct is to say yes, but we can have a discussion. But certainly at a minimum, right? This detailed budget would be posted and available on the website.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm just concerned about there being confusion with both of those budgets available at town meeting.
We can print them on a different color.
Mhm.
It's still gonna cause confusion.
Yeah. I think based on our earlier discussion, I think there was general consensus that we're still going to need to have this information made available to the town and not just the committee. And so
I'm just to follow up, AJ, so which document are we going to? Okay. So if we do a mailing of it, you would do the ATM version only? And then the other version available online?
I mean, I'm just speaking for myself. I think that would be, I think it would be wise to share. I mean, if there's some distribution that's happening to every household, to share the ATM budget that's going to be voted on at town meeting.
Right.
And there can be a note that says, for members of for citizens that are interested in a more detailed picture of how of how these departments are spending their funds. There will be a more detailed budget that can be downloaded from the website at such and such address or something along those lines. And then we can also have a discussion about whether we want to bring physical hard copies of the detailed budget as kind of a supplementary document that those who are interested in can pick up at town meeting. I think that would be my instinct. I don't know if others have an opinion about this. George and then Jim Walton.
Yeah, I would say, looking at it from a cost benefit analysis point of view, I just don't think the benefit is going to be worth the cost. The cost of maintaining the two schedules and trying to make sure they're accurate, organizing them so there's no confusion at town meeting. I just don't see a real savings here for us. And, I've been to many town meetings, as all of you have, and the format we're using has never really caused a lot of confusion. And people are used to it, and there always are a number of people who are interested in many lines. And the full detailed budget gives them a good understanding of how each department runs and what's involved in running that department. And yeah, the information will be available, but I just think it's gonna be confusing. Which document are we looking at? I have a question about what's in the expenses. We'll grab the other document. We're gonna end up printing twice as many documents. And I just think that that whole piece is gonna negate a lot of the benefit. I do like the idea of the flexibility in the budgets myself. You know, I understand there's other point of views, but it would save us trouble with FinCom reserve transfers. It would. I like that idea, but I really don't think that for the number of lines we're talking here, and maybe we can pick up another 11 with salary lines. I just don't think it's cost effective for us, and I think it's going to be very confusing when we're in the heat of the battle.
All right, so George, just to be clear, having gone through this exercise, because you're the one that's done this, your feeling at this point is that that it would not be worth the potential kind of benefits that we've discussed in previous meetings to move forward with this alternative budget format. Is that your current sort of
that's my feeling. That's my instinct. That doesn't mean I'm right. That's my perspective. I do know that there's going to be that effort, not only with, like we talked about, making sure that it runs smoothly and both schedules sync out. You know, I think we'll probably do okay with that. We'll have to be diligent down the stretch. But then that whole idea of having two separate budgets, distributing them, and also, yeah. And I don't see any real cost to the way we did it before. I don't know what our real benefit is. There are some benefits, no question, but I just don't think they're worth it.
I mean, I think the benefits that, again, I think there were two benefits that I think have been discussed in or potential benefits that have been discussed in earlier meetings. One was about the kind of the benefit of a kind of more simple format would make it easier for town residents to kind of wrap their heads around the budget. And I think it sounds to me like your thinking now is that maybe since it's not as many lines that are being eliminated as we might have assumed when we first started discussing this, that maybe that's not such a real benefit. I think the second one was about this issue of flexibility, like giving department heads an opportunity, if needed for a particular reason, to move some funds from one line to another without needing to come to FinCom for a FinCom transfer. So I think that is kind of the key benefit in making this kind of cost benefit calculation. And so I think, well, let me hear what some others have to say. Jim Walton.
Yes. That's exactly my understanding, AJ. And I think that was the reason we as a committee voted to go forward with this. It was not a unanimous decision, but we did agree to go forward with this process for those two reasons. I guess I'm sort of surprised we're now re-debating the discussion we had, I think, some months ago.
We're re-debating it, Jim.
I guess the point, I guess maybe if we've only come up with 42 lines, maybe that's the issue. If that's all we can do, maybe it's not enough to get the flexibility that we're looking for to allow managers to allow that flexibility, or maybe it's not enough to allow the easier to digest point with the voters or with the town people. But I guess I would challenge us to see whether we can move more than 42 lines and accomplish our objectives that we agreed to originally.
It can't be done.
All right, George.
Yeah, just to Jim's comment, we voted on this in the past, and now we're talking about it again. That was the point of the mock-up, was to see how it looks and to see if it reinforces, the decision we made. And the point of the mock-up was to kind of highlight the pros and cons. What did we not think of? And so that's why I have some of these cons here that I pointed out. Yeah, that's all. Everybody, if the committee wants to continue to do this, we should what I would suggest is everybody look through the budget, make recommendations of where we can do further consolidations. Number one is salary lines. Again, and then any others. Because like when I showed emergency management, for instance, emergency management, I mean, there's really one line is 70% of the cost. So do we want to bury the others? So there are opportunities to do that in this budget, but we have to agree as a community where to do them and have some kind of.
Mhm. So as a follow-up, and Bob, I see your hand is up. I was going to suggest, George, that is this something you can share, or maybe a version of this that just has the that we can kind of go through and see what?
Yeah, I can send this out to everybody. I'll make a version with this, that, and that. But it was what we usually do, the summary, and I'll just leave this, I'll leave this here for whoever,
I think that would be good. And then I think we can, I think we can have a follow-up discussion. Is there more consolidation that can be made that would, kind of help us address the kind of two primary goals that we had for why we wanted to do this? And then, I'm not opposed to us, after some further discussion about it, kind of, hearing entertaining a motion if folks want to sort of re-vote on whether to move forward or not. That seems to be reasonable to me, because this was an idea, it was a concept, we discussed it, it wasn't unanimous, but a consensus of the committee thought that there were some potential benefits to moving forward. And then now we're sort of doing some implementation, and maybe, based on that implementation, we may, I think it's worth kind of checking in with people again about whether they want to move forward or not. So does that sound like a reasonable sort of way to move forward on this? Bob, then Susie, and then Jim Walton.
Yeah, I support that idea, AJ. And I just wanted to say, I wanted to caution the committee about this notion of flexibility and simplification. I mean, I really don't think that that goes very well with our duty as a FinCom to overdo the idea of simplification and flexibility. We're supposed to be the guardians of the town budget. We're supposed to vet it. We're supposed to be sure that it's accurately reflects the needs of the town, and that the people managing it are managing it in a reasonable way, and it's transparency to the town meeting about that. I don't think that simplification as itself is a really worthy goal. I mean, it's not that complicated. Most people can understand it, and neither is flexibility, because I just for extreme example, the Pentagon has flexibility in their budget, and we have no idea how they're spending their money, and that's irresponsible on the part of our government. And we have a similar responsibility to the U.S. Congress in our little town, which is to oversee the budget and to be aware of how the money is being spent. So I just caution us to not think too strongly or too solely about simplification and flexibility.
Okay, Susie?
I feel like the only thing that's come up today that I want to consider is the amount of work it takes to do this process, and George is wary of any kind of mistakes that could be made. I do think of this as, once it's a prototype, it can become a template and it can move forward. We won't always be able to rely on George to manage this every year. So I'm hoping whatever the process is, the numbers can be fit into the condensed version without a lot of problem or effort. But if it is too much effort and it's dependent on a volunteer who may or may not be able to do this every year, then that's a factor.
I think, yeah.
Sorry, Becky, did you go?
I guess I was just gonna say, I think that the budget itself needs to remain the guardian needs to remain the town administrator in the future. Not that it'll be me, but with volunteer support. But I think at the end of the day, this is not project that the guardianship of the budget should be turned over to somebody outside of town hall.
Jim Walton?
Yeah, I guess a couple of words. I heard Barry again, and the Barry, I don't like that word. Like Susie doesn't, for the same reason. It just implies something that I don't think is something we're trying to accomplish here. In no way do I feel that we're looking to reduce our responsibility as a finance committee and really taking and managing this budget process and understanding all of our costs. I'm not making the case that we take any of that away. That's our number one priority. And I think if any one of us has an issue with any line within this budget, we have an opportunity as a member of the finance committee to go into that line and to drill into it to whatever detail we feel we need to until we're comfortable. So for me, we still have these two objectives. One is to allow some flexibility for managers, and the other is, we can add limitless lines. And to somebody's point earlier, limitless lines gives us complete transparency. Maybe that's the case, but I can make a case that we won't be able to see the forest of the trees. If you have too much information, you start to lose track of what's important. So I think it needs to be a balance. It can't be one line, and it can't be infinite number of lines. There's a certain number of lines that we can use and gets us the information we need in an effective manner, and we can still do our jobs to the degree that we need to drill down to specific information as needed. So I just think I'm just challenging us as a committee to keep working on this process, which I think is where AJ, that's where you are on this. I think challenge us to keep working on this and see if we can come up with a solution that we can live with.
Yeah, George?
Okay, so first of all, when I send this to everybody and you're all looking at it, you'll be looking at the detailed schedule here, and then you'll be considering other things. Remember that some of the lines that I buried, some of the sections that I consolidated, there are lines in the consolidations that you might want to have on a summarized schedule. So I'm asking everybody, just remember that and think about that as you go. Not because I'm trying to sell it or not sell it, but you're just think about that, because there probably are some lines that when you look at the lines by department, you're going to think, maybe I want to show that. I don't know if this is one of those, but there might be a few here that are so large and so important to how the department operates that you're just going to feel like they should be there. So please consider that. As far as the level of effort goes, it's definitely creating a level of effort, and the town administrator is going to have to be somebody who is competent with Excel spreadsheets. I can't imagine that that's never going to be the case, but there's always going to be that, because this looks good maybe, but it's not real sophisticated. It's just using links and tying back to the other one. And when the other one changes, one has to make sure that they go back and confirm that that change is properly reflected. So the level of effort is definitely a real thing. And, I think Becky's the best person to answer that question, especially after I send this out. And Becky gets a chance to look at it and maybe ask me questions about it. And that's it. One other thing, just to Jim's, I think it was Bob made the point about the summarizing. We as a finance committee are still going to use the budget request forms. And we're still going to have a comparison year to year of those budget request forms, line by line, item by item. So I don't think anybody here is professing the idea that we don't continue to manage the budgets or interact with the department managers without getting down to the nth degree, getting down to the detail, and having that detail when questions come up at annual town meeting. So that's certainly something I think we all agree we're going to continue. I just want to make that.
Yeah. Just one follow-up, George, on the earlier point you made. I think Becky, I'd like to have you sort of think about this over the next couple of weeks and at our next discussion about this. I guess I have a specific question for you, which is, can you envision a process where a version of this workbook that this is a mock-up right now, but let's say we get to a place where we've, as a committee, have made a decision about all the consolidation that we want to do, and we've got two sheets. Okay, we've got a workbook with two worksheets. One is a detailed, same detailed budget we are used to looking at, and then it has a second sheet, which is an ATM format that is linked to it. And could you imagine a process where that workbook is now handed off to you, and as I think you use the term guardian, as the guardian of the budget moving forward, you're just working from that workbook that has, you know, an additional sheet in it that you do not really use, like you're not entering information into that expense, that ATM form, right? That's just information that's linking to the detailed budget. But essentially that would be the budget Excel document that you kind of work with moving forward. And I'm not expecting an answer tonight, but I think if you could think about, is that a process that can work for you? And do you have concerns about that? And let's make sure we get your feedback on that at our next.
Okay.
All right, Bob.
I just want to say, George, I think maybe you should use the word interred instead of buried, okay?
Yeah, I know, I'm sorry.
Uh,
All right. I think we've got a plan moving forward. Any other comments about this before we move on? Okay. First of all, huge thank you to you, George. I know that was not a like a quick, small project. That looks like it was an enormous.
Thank you. You're welcome. I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, and whatever we choose to do, it was critical that somebody sort of take this first step of getting this consolidated linked budget together. So really thank you so much. Okay, project updates. Becky, are there any updates on any of the various projects that you want to share with the committee?
The culvert project is looking much more favorable than it was at our last meeting. We have, I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of a double. Can anybody hear me?
I think,
There's an echo.
can you
One second.
mute on one of the devices?
I'm gonna put it on the pocket. So didn't I lose my cell phone? And remind me, I put it out in the hallway.
You're reverbing, Becky, you're reverbing.
I'm still doing it?
Yes.
yeah, can you put one of them on mute?
The
Mute
one
one
in
of
the
them?
hallway, can you put that on mute?
Oh, now she's frozen.
How about now?
Yeah,
That's good.
Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
So the culvert project, we are past the threat of rain wiping us out, which is a wonderful thing. The last permitting we were able to do with Concom allowed for the dam keeper to take over in maintenance of the spillway like he normally does. And so he has been able to keep it at he was allowed to go down -2 inches from the spillway. And that was just enough to keep the last rains from becoming a problem. So we moved into a drier week last week. And then on Thursday and Friday, the big cranes came out and delivered all the concrete pieces to the dam. And hopefully you all saw some pictures that are the proof that this has happened. I know Jim Hemingway is going down frequently to
Every
um,
day, every day.
every day to check out progress. We've had, at this point, we're backfilling around the culvert pieces, putting in all the stainless steel joint connectors, wrapping with different paper, and then stone is going in, and there'll be more layers of stone and fill, and to bring us back up to the roadway. And hopefully in the earlier part of November, we will have paving done, and then put in guardrails and reopen the road. So that is all very good news. The one unfortunate incident that happened during this process was, despite the person who was removing, in charge of moving the concrete structures from behind the fire station, the first morning very early, backed over our septic tank at the fire station. So now what added to MAS's list of projects is they will, they'll be responsible for the new septic tank that will be installed behind the fire station.
It's
And we
not
hope-
bad news.
Well, okay.
Yeah, it is to MAS construction.
Yes,
was-
that's true.
But so that was unfortunate, but the good thing is we are moving ahead. The project is looking solid. So far I do not have notice of any other adjustments in the cost. We might have some because of the fill, but I'm still uncertain. It looks like that we're still within our boundaries on cost. But when I get new information on that, I will share that with you all.
Becky,
Other projects, I'm sorry.
when is the last date that paving companies who are willing to pave? Because that's a critical date.
Yeah, typically December 15th.
Oh,
is
that late.
cutoff.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, so the last time we were trying to do work at the dam, we were unable to start until December going into January, and then it was a real problem. But we are still in good shape moving forward, and as MAS promised, once they begin a project, they are on it and working. I think they put in 12-hour days on
Yeah,
Thursday
Thursday
and
and
Friday.
Friday, they were there until 6 o'clock.
Yeah, and arrived at 6 a.m. So
Yeah.
they're proved to be very competent over and over. And we look forward to success on this project. Other projects you are interested in, the school things have wrapped up. Anyone have a question on other projects?
The fire station, gas.
That is quiet at the moment after the last testing, and more work will be done soon with tie and bond. But I don't
about-
have a new update.
Well, did the septic tank crack on the side or just the top, the lid?
Unfortunately, it wasn't just the lid. It was at
Oh,
first.
so that's gonna conflate the data on the gasoline spill.
Well, it was the top
Hopefully
box.
dilute it.
It broke, so,
Yeah, right, so he broke the
So
whole
it's a
box.
whole new tank they need to replace.
oh yeah.
Well, the lid is actually poured together, but I mean, the side cracked, I mean, it flowed out.
Well, it didn't float out. We did not have any
Didn't have any leakage.
spillage. There was no leakage. It's still functioning. It's not, as you can imagine, it's not heavily used.
right.
The fire department has one full-time employee. So, and we haven't had an ice storm in 12 years, so we're doing
Can those be repaired, with concrete, or do they usually have to be replaced?
replaced.
It'll be replaced, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Other project is, how are we doing on PFAS? Have we got more homes testing positive, or have we reached the limit?
At this point, we are at a limit. The unfortunate thing I've learned going forward is We will also be required to test the homes that tested negatively on a quarterly basis. Which will be quite costly, but
Wow, that's gonna be costly. Did
That's
we
a
get the money for-
DEP requirement?
yes, that's what they have requested.
And how many homes
Oh.
would there be approximately?
Well, we had, I think, a total of around 60
Or-
homes, and we have filters in 30. So I think it was like 64 tested total. I apologize, these are not exact figures. I don't
Okay.
have that data in front of me, but it's approximate.
Mhm.
Bob?
I was just gonna ask AJ about about the track. Maybe unless you're got something else, Becky.
Oh,
But you can look into the track. Would you have any time to do that?
yeah, I listened to the discussion at the last regional school committee. So I mean, I think what we know now is that an RFQ was issued for you know, firms interested in providing kind of design, permitting, construction services. Bids are due on November 1st. I mean, this is not new news, right? But the current debt authorization specifically calls for an artificial turf for the interior field, and that in addition to the 8-lane track. That if the committee, which I think is a possibility, they decide to actually move in a different direction, that's going to basically require them to rescind the debt authorization that I think this is now what, two years ago that I think they authorized those funds for the project. So if they, because that authorization specifically called for an artificial surface, it would require them to rescind the debt authorization and presumably issue a new debt authorization. There's I think $2,200,000 of public funds that have been allocated for this project. There's still, I think, some confusion about how much private fundraising dollars have been raised. And I think some of the confusion lies in what, like, this distinction between funds that were actually contributed versus promised. I forget what the language is, but like there's a distinction between like, here's a check, I'm writing it and I'm giving it to the booster.
Right, versus what I
this person
pledged.
versus like I'm committing to doing the following. And so it's a little unclear as to what the current amount is. And I think reading between the lines, it's not entirely clear that there are enough funds allocated for the original sort of like version of the project that was approved by the committee. But again, I'm not totally sure on that. The committee, they were very specific to not specify how much, like an actual dollar amount of private funds that have been raised for the project. And I think that's still forthcoming. So that's basically where things stand. I mean, I think I mentioned at the last meeting that the RFQ asks for information about previous experience with lots of different types of surfaces. So I think they're asking people about kind of their history doing both grass and artificial turf and low PFAS like alternatives. And so I think to me that suggested that they're keeping their options open for still like different kinds of projects. So that's where things stand. So I think the key is the next key date is November 1st when those bids are due. George?
So I just want to ask you, make sure I heard you correctly. You said that the authorization would be null and void if what? If,
So what I was saying is that the debt authorization that the regional school committee funded, I think at least 2 years, I think it was maybe 2 fiscal years ago for this project, specifically mentioned that option 3, I think is what it was in that,
Artificial
remember
turf.
that original report. So it was tied to that specific design. And so that design is a reorientation of the track, expansion to, I think, 8 lanes, and the installation of an artificial turf field in the center of that track. They don't do that. They have to rescind. If they want to do something else, a different type of project, they have to rescind that debt authorization, presumably issuing.
Also in my limited experience fundraising, a lot of times you'll take what was pledged, and you'll build your budget based on 75 or 80% of that. You always have to assume you're not going to get everything. So I'll be curious to see how they come across that. But yeah, it's pretty much recognized that all your pledges aren't going to pay.
Yeah, that was the term I was fishing for. Yeah, I think the difference is committed versus pledged.
Yeah, same thing. Same thing.
Yeah.
I'm just using that term because that's the term.
All right. Any other questions about projects, municipal projects? No? Okay.
Quick question, AJ, is what's the legal process here if they rescind the debt authorization? Was that approved by town meeting? Was that just approved by the school committee alone? Or
It was, I think my understanding is that the school committee approved that, and then the towns had a certain amount of time to essentially raise an objection. And nobody raised an objection. And so within that time frame. And so that essentially by default formalized that debt authorization. So I don't know what the process would be. I think there's also another complication, right? Which is that some additional public funds have been raised. I think like almost $1 million, right, from of CPA funds from Amherst. And it may be the case, I'm not positive, that those funds were similarly tied to a specific project, right, design. And so if that's not the project anymore, it's some other project, I'm not sure if those additional public funds that were committed for the track, on top of the regional school committee's debt authorization, I'm not sure if those funds are still available for a project that involves a different design. I think that's potentially another complication.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, expense report review. I think, Becky, I think you sent one earlier today. Is that right?
Yeah, it just came today.
Well, we actually have 2 now, right? Because it looks like Becky had sent us the final one for fiscal 23, and she sent us a recent one for the current year.
Really?
Yeah, not necessarily today. She sent one today, and she sent the other one like 2 weeks ago.
So to clarify, the one today was the final FY23
Yeah.
report. Is that right, Becky?
Yes.
And I sent the wrong one because it's not final yet.
Oh, it's not. Okay.
It should be final within about 2 weeks or a week or
Okay.
5 days.
Ignore this one.
Not
Okay.
yet. I apologize. I had to print it out as a working document. Let me,
So Becky, last time we were looking at the expense report, you had a question you were going to answer for me about Veterans Affairs programs. Did you get a chance to do that? Veterans programs?
I'm sorry, Bob. I have not. I have to make that a priority
Okay, thanks.
in the next few days.
So we're in October, 4 months into the fiscal year, and we haven't had a FinCom transfer yet?
Yeah, we did.
We did
Yeah, we did
this year?
yeah.
So it must have happened at one of the meetings I was not at.
I don't
And we
know.
have to sign a form?
I did.
Yeah, what was that?
I know, I'm trying to remember.
Can't remember it either.
Well, I'll start a new FinCom reserve schedule for the current year.
Was it legal?
Not yet. I'll be coming for that one.
You're getting ahead of yourself.
All right.
I apologize because so I didn't send out the latest version.
Yeah. All right, well, why don't we
Sent
tackle,
the FY
why don't we do that at our next meeting?
Okay,
We'll skip this for tonight. It's already 8:10 anyway. All right. Are there other committee updates or other business that members wanted to bring up? All right, Susie?
I have a school committee meeting this Thursday, and I was thinking through our plan. They do not have they have meetings scheduled for October, November, and they don't know, the chair couldn't tell me, or they haven't decided beyond that. What happened last time was that we have them scheduled to talk to the school committee on January 16th. But their meeting will be January 19th. So this happened last time. They hadn't approved their budget when we asked to see them in January. We did get a lot of information. We did send in our questions. We did get the answers back. So I'm just seeing that we're going to repeat that little dance where they will not have met in January to approve their budget when we want to see them on January 16th. So our choice is to move our meeting with them to the next month, or to be comfortable with the question and answer process we went through last time, and that when we meet with them on January 16th, it won't be an approved budget. It'll be one that has been discussed. They did not make big changes. They didn't make any changes, I believe, after their January. Well, they didn't make changes to the budget. So we'll see a draft that is very much likely to be the whole thing, but it won't be approved because their meeting will follow our meeting in
Well,
January.
Our following meeting on January 30th is an open date, so we could make our open date the 16th, right? And just have the elementary school show us a final approved budget. I don't know will that make a difference?
So we would reschedule the school to January 30th. That's what you're thinking.
Yeah, because it's an open date in our calendar right now.
We could do
That
it
was
that
one of
way.
the dates where we don't have anybody penciled in.
Yeah, and mostly I know that I'm gonna be talking with them on Thursday, so I want to give them a definitive. If we make a change, I want to tell them about it.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, any concerns about that? I do think that process we had last year, Susie, where we were able to kind of develop some questions based on an earlier draft was a helpful one. So I hope we get a chance to do that again.
So I'll tell them that's what we would like, and that we would reschedule their meeting for January 30th, counting on the fact that they will have finished their approval process.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, that sounds good.
So before I start, I have a question for Susie, though. The school, I saw that the superintendent, she's retiring. And I guess there's some discussion about, do we really need a union or not? Is that a serious conversation? Is there an analysis going on about that?
So I did put something in the minutes that reflected that the issues around Irving pulling out of the union are pretty not firm at all. Yes, there is turmoil in the union. Yes, Irving has postured or discussed or thought about leaving. Our superintendent will retire at the end of this school year. And they did begin the hiring process because they know that the candidates are available sooner rather than later, in terms of the hiring pool. But we don't have much information about whether Irving is actually going to pull out of the union. And I don't think there's a lot of use to speculate how it will affect us, but I will ask that question if it's any clearer, and if the superintendent's office has any sort of sketch of what it looks like at this point, and when we might know more, because it seems pretty significant to me. But I think it just might not be. There was quite a pretty big blowout, I think, between the superintendent and Irving.
Ooh. Yeah, well, I know it's a question we've asked ourselves before. What are we getting for our money? And I don't really know the answer. So Personnel Board, we did fill an open position, just to let everybody know. Also, in our last meeting, we assigned 2 people to negotiations that are going to happen probably in the spring. Town administrator contract and the police union, police union contracts, just double check that, are going to become, so that's just some AJ to think about. We'll have to assign somebody from the finance committee. Yeah, police union and town administrator contracts. So that's personnel board. And then tomorrow night, the assessors board is meeting. The assessors have moved, the lead assessor, David Burgess, has completed the valuations. He had us sign off on the forms, so we know the value of the properties. But I'm not sure it's final yet. He might still be doing some fine tuning. I found out today, but we will see. But we're pretty close to getting the tax recap, and I hope that, well, I don't know, I can't predict, but it looks like we're getting close and we might have an estimate on the tax rate. The good news is, one thing I can tell you is the new growth number came in higher than the 40,000 that we estimated it to balance the budget. So we've got to pick up there, and that's going to lower the amount of money needed to be raised by property taxes by about 30,000. And we have a savings, the analysis we did in the cherry sheet for the current year, we had a little savings there. So that'll also decrease how much we need to raise from taxes. So fairly good news. And it's looking like the tax rate probably is not going to increase by very much, because the values of the properties in town seem to be going up. It's just the calculation of the rate. It still doesn't mean we're all saving money on taxes. We know that our property tax bills will probably rise because of what happened last year, but there's some good things that are kind of negate some of what we were estimating. So hopefully in our next meeting, after meeting tomorrow night, I'll have information about where we're at taxes.
Okay, Bob?
Yeah, I just want to swing back to Susie for a second and ask her if she would ask the school committee to include enrollment numbers in their budget draft so that we could see that over time as part of our process. And I also wanted to, I don't know if this is the right time to mention it, but I would like to continue to investigate the issue of school choice. And I would be happy to join a subcommittee, and I don't know if any other members would be, if the committee would support that, other members would want to join me to do some research into that issue for, not necessarily for any action by us, but just for understanding of what this issue means to the town and for its financial future. I think it's an important issue to look at for reasons which our earlier discussions make clear to me, at least.
All right. Bob, I think, one thing that might be helpful, if you can sort of just articulate at our next meeting, if we're going to actually call this like a subcommittee, if you can just maybe articulate at the next meeting kind of what the sort of goals of that committee would be. I think that'd be kind of
Makes sense. Makes sense to me. I'll do that.
Okay, Becky?
You're on mute.
Where is she?
I'm
I
muted.
can see her, it's on mute.
I wanted to ask Bob again. So your question it was on the veterans programs, and you wanted it, or did you want information on the benefits? Because we haven't had benefits in the last year. So did you want the history in the last few years? I just want to make sure I have your question.
That report showed a line, and I think it said
That 102%.
102% increase in that line. So I didn't know what it meant, what it was for, what it represented. You didn't know either at our last meeting. So you said you'd find out.
I don't think it was the increase. I thought it was expended.
Veterans programs was expended, but there
Yeah.
was an increase in the expense. I think I have written down here 102%.
$114.
Oh, no, it says, oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what it shows now. What it shows now is it was paid for. So it's basically the assessment from the Greenfield Veterans Organization we belong to. That's what the Veterans Program pays for. And somewhere along the line, it looks I didn't get the final number. It went up $114. And the number I had was $114 short.
Oh, well, I'll look into that further because I don't think I would have really cared that much about $114, but
Yeah, so maybe maybe there was a correction. I don't
Yeah.
know.
okay, thanks.
All right, George?
It's been so long, I forgot what it was. What I wanted to say was about school choice funds. In my mind, we know we try to use it for one-time expenses. In my mind, and I don't know how much money we have available in, but in my mind, it's always been a place where I thought we could deal with the spikes that happen from sped students coming and going. And I always kind of thought of it in my mind as a reserve for that purpose. And we should always make sure that we don't spend it all so that we have it for those spikes. That way we can build a budget that's unaffected by those and we can see the trends going on in the regular activity without these unusual things. So it's just a food for thought in terms of that whole conversation as we move into school choice. It just bounced in my head when we were talking about it. So I just
All right, Susie?
And George, when you were saying the contracts, you said negotiating in the spring for the town administrator and the police. When is the school teacher's contract going to get negotiated?
don't know.
They don't deal with us on that. They set it up themselves and then they might look for a representative.
Okay.
But that would be a question for you to ask.
Okay.
Right back at you.
All right. Any other committee updates? All right. Last item on the agenda was agenda building for future meetings. So well, let's make sure we're all clear on our next meeting date. So that is, what is it? Let's see.
31st.
31st?
Halloween.
Yeah, is anybody gonna be trick-or-treating?
Spooky.
Yeah, there's gonna be kids climbing all over town. We
We
can't.
should all wear masks and dress
We're
up
on
for it,
Zoom.
for FinCom.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess,
Scrooge.
I mean, serious question, is there any problem with meeting on the 31st?
Fine.
Really? I guess I'm the only one who lives in Halloween zone.
Yeah,
Nobody comes to my
that's true.
house.
Even last year when it was really dead, I had 70 kids.
Yeah.
Whoa,
Really?
Yeah.
Everything?
I used to get over 200. I used to get
Nobody
almost
comes
every
around
kid
home?
everywhere, and high school kids would straggle through.
you
Really?
can wear your costume to the meeting, Becky.
Well, do we wanna think about meeting on the 1st or the 30th? Is that
I don't care.
anybody? Becky, would we be overlapping any other important meetings that might be happening on one of those 2 dates?
Not that I have on my calendar, no.
I'm fine with us
Would you guys mind? I'm just,
I don't want 90 kids.
That's fine.
Disappointed to not get candy from.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, that way I'll be free to go over to your house, Becky, and get some candy.
Right, candy.
are you gonna wear a costume?
Sure, why not? I'll come up with something.
So make it Wednesday, the 1st.
Yeah, Wednesday the 1st.
One of the scariest costumes you could wear is the assessor costume, George.
That's true. Big Tom costume's a little scary too.
And what does it look like?
Yeah, with a
I don't know.
clipboard. A
We'll come
clipboard
up
and a
with
tape
something.
measure, I think.
Bob, I'm gonna dress up as a Boston Celtic, maybe Porzingis.
How about a patriot?
Yeah, better
Yeah,
not.
got lots of blood stains on my uniform.
Shoot, you're better off being a jet.
I
You're
will.
doing better than we are.
I'll send April a message just to make sure she's
Okay.
We're talking the 30th now, is that what you're saying?
No, the 1st,
November 1.
Wednesday, the
Wednesday.
1st.
November,
Okay.
November 1st. All right. Okay.
Thank
And
you guys, I appreciate it.
sure. All right, and we'll have follow-ups on kind of two topics that we talked about tonight, the chapter 70 work and the alternative budget format.
I'll send an email tomorrow.
I was looking at we call it the Jim Walton Excel document, right? With a bunch of topics that when you were chair, Jim, I think Susie sent this around, and I was kind of looking at it to see if there were some agenda topics that we wanted to kind of make sure we added to our upcoming meetings. I had a couple things. One was, and I want to run this by you guys. I thought it might be a good idea for us to have a statement kind of drafting, for us to draft a statement that sort of outlines our support of kind of a permanent adoption of the modified statutory method. Just because I have this, we've talked about it, but I have this sense that it's going to come up again as an issue this year, and I really want us to be prepared and kind of on point and sort of defending our position. So I thought that before we even get to 4 town meetings, if we could have kind of a clearly articulated statement of why we support this method and that this whole committee has kind of discussed and approved, I think that would be a useful kind of tool for us to have. Does that make sense to folks? Or Becky?
I was just thinking, it might be good to maybe invite Anna Hurd to
Yeah.
do that discussion.
Good point. Yeah.
She's our new regional rep to the region
Okay.
So,
school committee.
George?
yeah, it's definitely a concern because the superintendent, 3 of the people on the school committee that supported this and went along with it are gone. And so we don't know what the new group are going to say. I think Doug is probably going to be supportive of what we're doing right now, but I don't know that. And the rest of the school committee, I don't know which direction they're going to go in, but certainly Amherst is getting dragged in their budget, dragged around in their budget. I'm afraid to poke the bear if nobody's thinking about it, and we're just going to because Doug last year when he presented the budget just did it,
Yeah,
and
right.
nobody even talked about it. And so, part of me says, do we really want to raise this issue? But then the other part of me says we need to be ready. AJ, I think to your point, if this issue comes up, so I think we should probably do what you're saying, but I'm not sure if we really should be approaching the region. I think we should be ready to respond to the region if anybody tries to reverse course.
Right. I guess that was my thinking, is that this was a kind of a tool we have and we keep in our back pocket in case there is kind of a rigorous discussion of like going back to the drawing board on assessment method, and that it would be something we wouldn't be caught off guard. We'd have kind of a well articulated position that we can defend. And I mean, I think we have the, I mean, I know we have this, right? Because we've discussed some sort of bullet points at past meetings, but I would be comfortable, like if we had a statement that, again, we don't have to do anything with it right now, other than just have it available to us if and when this becomes an issue. I'm not suggesting we send it to Doug or the region at this point. But yeah, just to sort of be prepared and be kind of one step ahead of. Maybe I'm wrong, and this is, you know, it'll go.
Nothing wrong with being prepared.
Oh, that's good.
So that was my thought. I thought the suggestion involving Anna is a good one. I'll reach out to her. So I think somewhere in my notes I have some bullet points that we discussed in preparation of a previous. I don't think we wrote it. Well, maybe we did. I can't remember.
did. We had a document.
All right.
Yeah, we've got.
I'll start from that. I'll dig that up. Yeah, you're right. We did write up and we shared it, right, with the region. So I'll dig that up and I'll bring that to our next meeting and just make sure you all are comfortable with that and see if we want to tinker with it at all.
Great.
Okay, there's that. And the only other topic that occurred to me is we had a discussion, I think, around or sort of town meeting about sort of looking at sort of current funding levels for our capital stabilization and stabilization accounts, and like being a little bit concerned about kind of how maybe they weren't as balanced as we might want them to. And I just remember us saying that, you know, there would be time for us to sort of discuss this and think about whether we need to do anything on this. So I want to make sure we didn't sort of lose track of that thought. So maybe I'll add it to the next agenda, and I might add it to the sort of end of the agenda, because we now have like quite a few items. But and if we don't get to it at the next meeting, maybe we can make sure we get it at the following one. Are there any other items either from the list that Susie shared, or any other topics that folks want to make sure we cover? Susie.
We had on our list, the 25-year plan review for capital plan. And I just want to know if capital planning is considering going over that, and if there are any changes, they let us know.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything about that from capital planning from Ellen or anybody. And I think Becky, I think what would be what's our usual timeline for sort of reconvening in the capital planning committee?
I'll talk to Ellen tomorrow, because it's usually around now. I think we're a little late.
So
I'll check in with her and get her to get a meeting going.
okay, I'll make sure to bring that up at the first meeting then. Any other topics? All right.
2 hours.
So with that, I'll make a motion to adjourn our meeting tonight.
Second,
All right.
Arvanitis, aye.
Groves, aye.
Hemingway, aye.
Cashew, aye.
Mosier, aye.
Walton, aye.
Cheers.
Hey, thanks.
Take care,
everybody.
everyone.
You all have a nice evening.
All right.
You too.
And Wednesday, November 1st.
Happy Halloween.
Yeah. All right, bye.
Bye.